prey underneath, just like a rabbit cage, and for the exact same reason.
Oh, wow. That is torture, actually.
Yes.
Worse than torture. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometime during the first 10 years of this treatment, Rhoda decided that she no longer wanted to watch the world go by through the bars of a cage, and she clawed her own eyes out.
Oh, wow. Instead of getting better, it sounds like she was just getting worse and worse and worse.
Well, yeah. She was in there for so long, her hips atrophied. She was no longer able to stand when she was let out. And she was reduced to crawling around on the floor. And she was kept in that cage for decades. After she had calmed down, she was moved to something called a box bed, which is just a box with no top, and she was covered with a canvas sheet. She spent decades in this situation.
Oh, wow.
Now, in 1902, the Peoria State Hospital was founded. And one of Dr. Zeller's overriding tenets was that he felt that he had a mandate to care for everyone. He said, no patient is incurable. That's what I'm here to do. So how do you prove that? How do you prove that no one is beyond help? Well, you go around to all the almshouses in the state and you cherry pick the most wretched, horrible, abused, maltreated cases. And you bring them to the Peoria State Hospital for care. And that's exactly what happened. In 1904, Dr. Zeller went to the Adams County Almshouse, and he found Rhoda. And he said, this patient is coming with me. And the superintendent of the almshouse didn't want to let Rhoda go.
Yeah.
He figured that the almshouse was going to be blamed for Rhoda's condition. And Dr. Zeller said, either this patient comes with me, or I shut your institution down, effective immediately.
Yeah, that's...
September 26th, 1904. There was a train that came from Quincy to Bartonville. It was very late getting in. There was a horrible storm that day, and part of the tracks had been washed out. So it wasn't until about 1:30 in the morning that the attendants and the nurses at the Peoria State Hospital got the news that the train had finally arrived in the station. The patients from Adams County, about 60 of them, were being transported on boxcars. So the attendants shoved the boxcar doors open and they escorted the patients out, and they're standing on the platform. And a couple of attendants got onto the boxcars and make sure nobody got left behind. And at one end of the boxcar, there was a great big wicker laundry basket. Now, this was unusual because it was standard practice for patients simply to arrive with the clothes on their backs and nothing else. So it was very unusual to find a laundry basket there. But they said, well, patients' belongings, I guess this comes off the train too. So one attendant on either end of this great big wicker laundry basket, they hump it off the boxcar and they plop it down onto the station platform. And just then, the lid of the box opens, the clothes part, and there sits Rhoda, jabbering at people.
Oh, that is horrible.
Her hips had atrophied so much that she could not sit in a wheelchair for that trip. She had to be carried around in a basket. That night, for the first time in 44 years, Rhoda Derry slept in a bed with clean white sheets.
Oh, wow. That is, and it's just not her. It was a lot of people. But, I mean, that is worse than actually any torture I've ever heard of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Her story is so compelling, and it has such a redemptive ending that I decided she needed her own book.
Yeah.
So 44 Years in Darkness is another book that you can find on Amazon. That's Rhoda's story.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting. If anybody, I wonder what her ghost is walking around. Has anybody...
She is.
She is.
Oh, she is one of our most beloved spirits, and that's where the cemetery comes in.
Okay.
I'm friends with an investigator who really loves to explore the Peoria State Hospital. And he knew of Rhoda's story, of course. And one of the biggest part of Rhoda's ghost lore is that in life, when she was in her teens, she picked up the habit of chewing tobacco. One of the family stories is that she would tell your fortune in exchange for a straw of tobacco.
Oh, wow.
And even when she got to the Peoria State Hospital, she was no longer kept in the crib, of course. She was allowed to crawl around the floor because her hips had atrophied. She could not stand. She had to crawl. But if she knew that you had tobacco in your pocket, she would crawl across the floor to you, and she would sit next to you and tug on your pants leg and look up and smile and, say, she would let you know that she wanted some of the tobacco that you had in your pocket. So that is part of her ghost lore. If you are anywhere on the hilltop, but especially in front of her grave, she is buried in Cemetery 1, and if you feel a tugging on your pants leg and you smell chewing tobacco, that's Rhoda. She wants to let you know that she's there.
Yeah.
So this friend of mine, James Barrow, was at Cemetery 1. He was visiting Rhoda. And he was recording, and he said, "Oh, Rhoda, I'm sorry. I meant to bring you some chewing tobacco, and I forgot. I apologize about that." And moments later on his recorder, you hear a gravelly voice say, "That's okay. I can't chew anymore."
Yeah. Yeah, that would make my hair stand right up, right there.
It was,
More than
the
that.
hair on my arms. He let me listen to that. And I was doing a book signing at Barnes and Noble, and he ran up to me. He said, "I have the recorder. This is on." And I listened to it, and every hair on my arm was standing straight up. It was great.
Actually, mine is right now on my arm from that what you've been talking about. That's out there. Wow.
Yeah.
Just some of the stuff you're saying, I just didn't even realize how bad it was. If you had, any mental condition, how bad they were treated. And, then you go, like, I would really like to go in a cemetery, one of those places where they were really treated bad and see what you would actually get. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it'd be a lot of pain and suffering,
I think so. And I don't know if I would want to go to a place like that because I have been so spoiled by the Peoria State Hospital. I've been so spoiled by the compassion that just emanates from that place, and that the memory of Dr. Zeller is still very, very strong in these parts. He's still a revered figure. We know exactly how lucky we are to have had a Dr. Zeller in our community.
Have you ever been by his grave at night and seen if you could pick up anything at all on a recording?
I went by his grave, but at the time I did, I was not as familiar with the history of the state hospital as I am now. So it didn't mean quite as much to me. So I really should go out to Springdale Cemetery at some point and find his grave again and tell him thank you. And maybe have a chat with Sophie as well.
I would, yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so interesting what you've been saying. Now, have you run into any bad experiences at all? Ghost hunting or anything? Or have you had any friends that had a real negative effect where they almost wanted to quit investigating the paranormal or anything like that?
Well, I've been very lucky in that regard. I have not had any experience like that, but I did talk to a friend of mine who actually wanted me to write a book about her experiences, and I did. It's called Hunting Demons, and she ran afoul of 3 demonic entities, and she wanted me to stop ghost hunting. She, after this experience that she had that just made her life hell for a couple of years, she was concerned a couple times when we met for her to tell me her stories and get this down on paper. There were a couple of times when she said, "Sylvia, I'm worried about you. I'm worried that you're leaving yourself open to these influences and whatnot. And I said, Linda, I hear you. I understand. You've told me your story, and it's horrifying and it's hair-raising. But this is something I still enjoy doing, so I'm not going to stop doing it.
Yeah.
So,
I've talked to a couple investigators. Actually, one of them told me that they actually had a spirit follow them home and actually harassed them for a period of time, and it was not a friendly spirit. So, I mean, that's the only thing I think sometimes you don't know what you're going to find. So,
right.
I mean, you could subject yourself to, almost as something as bad as a Ouija board. You go into a cemetery and, and instead of getting a nice spirit, you could get one that was a axe murder and decides that you're going to be its next victim one way or another.
Yeah. Oh, my sister is absolutely appalled that I go out and do this sort of thing on purpose. She said it's like playing ding dong ditch.
Yeah.
You don't know who's going to come out the door. And she is much more sensitive than I am. I think she would prefer that I had her sensitivity and she had mine.
Uh-huh.
Because she went to, I think it's called the Presidio in San Francisco. There's some sort of mission out south in the Southwest, that there's the church and there's a small recreation of an Indian village right next to, in the courtyard right next to the church, and kids can go inside these little hogans and learn about what it's like to Native American culture and that part of history. And my sister went through the church, and she went into this courtyard with the Native American homes and the hogans and whatnot. I think they're called hogans in that part of the world.
Uh-huh.
And she looked into one of them, and she backed away quickly, and all she would tell me was, there was somebody already in there.
Oh, that's, yeah. That's something.
Like, okay,
yeah.
I understand what you're saying. I don't know the details, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Wow. So, how long have you been writing, these type of, stories and books?
Oh, I've been writing nonfiction for about 8 years. I've been writing in general for over 30 years.
Uh-huh. Have you seen the paranormal field kind of opening up more the last few years, where more people are actually believing in it? And
absolutely,
and
yes.
don't have the negativity to it like they did years ago?
The negativity is beginning to fade, I think. People are a bit more open-minded about it. I mean, you've always had ghost stories. You've always had compilations of ghost stories in book form. I mean, ever since the middle of the 19th century, people were collecting ghost stories. It was a very popular thing to haul out these books of stories at Christmas and tell ghost stories at Christmas. But so you've always had compilations of ghost stories in books, but it's only been in the past couple of decades that, well, not even that long, that the medium of television and YouTube and internet-based shows have really become popular, and I think that has done a lot to bring it to the forefront of people's imaginations, because not everybody's a reader. I understand that. I grok that.
Uh-huh.
But there are a lot of people that like to watch TV. And that's a great medium because you've got the visual, you've got the sound, you've got the storytelling, and it's a lot easier for people to, if they've had this experience, if they want to share it, it's easy for them to contact somebody and say, hey, I'd like my story told. And hey, they may get on Ghost Hunters, they may get on Ghost Adventures, they may get on Mike True Ghost Story or whatever.
Yeah, but I now I'm probably going to have people mad at me. But some of the shows you watch them, and they're faking it. And
sometimes, yes, that's the downside to it.
And there was one show, and I'm not going to mention on what network, but the guy admitted that they, if they didn't find anything interesting, they faked the whole the whole episode. It was all,
Wow.
and